Welcome, Jenny. Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm so glad to be with you today, Teresa. Thanks for having me.
I've really been enjoying the process of your book, Spark Change 108 Provocative Questions for Spiritual Evolution. I have been picking one, taking my time, so I'm following your advice, but I am really enjoying it. I think lately I have been somewhat scattered with everything going on. So it was a nice sort of re entry back into myself again. So thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
Of course, the first thing I have to ask, I know you explain it in the book, but I thought it was very interesting, which is why 108 questions?
Oh no, you asked the one question that I don't usually answer
Oh, okay.
because I want people to read the full explanation in the book.
Okay.
But 108, I'll give you the short version. 108 is a sacred number in many traditions, particularly in yoga philosophy, and so it has a lot of associations with different things, and it meant something to me. There's often 108 beads on a mala, so when you're doing mantra, it's considered a sacred number. So I figured that 108 questions would be a good place to bring the book in, and it worked out well because it created the 12 themes with 9 sections per theme, and so it gives a good broad space for people to explore the different themes around change.
Yeah, definitely. It's a nice foundation. So I have, like I said, I've been appreciating it because I love the way it's laid out, and I love that the lessons sort of build on each other. And so beautiful. And thank you for at least a partial explanation of that. So, for our listeners who may not be aware, because we focus a lot on mindfulness meditation, and so everyone by now is probably very aware of what self awareness means, but how would you define spiritual self awareness?
That's a great question. We are very connected to our self as we experience self in the world, right? So, how we connect in our relationships, in our physical environments, what our bodies are going through. A lot of mindfulness practice has to do with the sensations as they're arising, the thoughts that are passing through the mind, the emotions that we're aware of in any given moment. But spiritual self awareness is really the acknowledgement that there is a non physical being that's part of who we are. And how do we connect to that? So, the orientation of this book is around getting people to start thinking about themselves as a soul, as a non physical being, as well as the personality self, and digging into the process of getting to know that spiritual self. And it's so much of it has to do with meditation because it's hard to experience the non-physical within the physical realm. So we have to kind of withdraw from the physical, at least temporarily, into those inner spaces of self-reflection and presence, where we can have, it's not an intellectual process, it's an experiential process.
Yeah, I have a challenge all the time trying to get people out of their heads. So I can definitely relate to that. Thank you. You wrote in the book, introspection is not for the faint-hearted or self-critical. And so I'm wondering if someone is stuck in self-criticism, which many people are. Do you have any suggestions or steps that they could take to sort of get to the place that they could begin to be more introspective?
This is so important, and it's why I put that caveat in there, because often where people get stuck is in this inner critic, the self-judgment and the inner criticism. And whether wherever that comes from, whether we experienced judgment or criticism from the outside and then we internalized it, or whether it's just been a part of our own inner dialogue for as long as we can remember, um, it is important that we start to address that if we're going to undertake spiritual self-inquiry, because we won't get beyond it until we address it. And the way to address it, I think, is through compassion. So the same compassion that we would offer to someone else when they're feeling really down on themselves, we need to offer to ourselves. And so just compassion and acceptance, um, the recognition that really we're all doing the very best that we know how to do at any given moment in time. And so, we learn and we grow from there. And that's all we can do, is show up as we are in this moment recognize that we're doing the best we know how to do, practice some self compassion, and then start asking the questions about how we can grow, how we can improve. And that's what takes us to new experiences.
Definitely. And I think too, an important aspect of self-compassion is self-forgiveness, because I hear people just hanging on to every mistake they've ever made. So it's not even just criticism, but it's old criticism. You know what I mean? They're not letting it go. So I really like that because I think it's very important. So now, based on my interaction with clients lately, I have to say I was really glad to see that you included accountability in the book. That's been a big topic lately. Um, and I think for some, they may not think that that sounds very spiritual. So I was wondering if you can explain why accountability is so important on this journey.
Oh, it is my rallying cry, I think, all the time, especially recently. It's something that's so missing, I think, in our modern culture. There's a lot of blame flying around in every sector, and we are not going to make any progress societally or personally until we start taking greater accountability for our choices, our actions, our words, how we're showing up, our attitudes every single day. It is an extremely important part of the spiritual path because and this is way too big of a topic to get into today, but when we talk about karma is really the law of accountability, because every action, every word that we offer into the world has a reaction or a consequence. So we are absolutely accountable for everything that we do or say. And until we recognize that and accept it and live within that accountability, we're really not going to make some good progress in our personal development or in our spiritual development.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's like a pandemic itself right now. It's like no one wants to be accountable, and it affects everything, not just our spiritual path. It affects business, it affects relationships. So, like I said, I'm really glad you included that because it's certainly one of the things we keep trying to include in our workshops, the importance of accountability.
Can I just say on that note too, we've all heard the phrase, be the change you want to see in the world.
Mhm.
And I heard it said in a recent book, be the change you want to see in your relationships. And we could play this out in so many different ways. Be the change that you want to see in your organization, be the change you want to see in the environment. And so it all starts with us. We can't lay blame outside if we're not making the change inside. And the peace has to start within. So we can't hope for a peaceful world unless we're cultivating an inner peace.
Absolutely. Thank you. In the lessons chapter, you talk about shifting our whys to whats. Why do you feel that's so powerful?
So that's such a great question as well. And we often, coming off the topic of accountability, we often go into that kind of self pity place of why me, why this, why now. We ask all these whys that really aren't that helpful in terms of moving us forward in our personal growth. The more important question is, what am I supposed to learn from this? The why is this here now, for what purpose, I think, is kind of the why and the extension of the why that I would put in there. But really looking at what is it meant to serve in terms of our inner self-awareness and our personal growth, I think, is a much better question than why is this happening to me.
Yeah, definitely. Um, when I actually did a year of my a master's in spiritual psychology here in Santa Monica, and
I did
every
too
oh,
at
you
university.
did? I was going to ask you when I read the part. So that's what I was leading to when I read the part in your book that you referred to. Our time here on Earth is basically school in session, and I use that all of the time. Like it's not about what's happening to us or why it's happening. It's about understanding what is there to learn from it? Sometimes what you learn from it is, I don't ever want to do that again, but it's okay. It's the idea to still look for that little nugget of, and sometimes that's where the biggest lessons are anyway, but it's about looking for that little nugget of information that then you can use to further either reflect or take action or whatever, comes naturally after that.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
great. So I think we're in this big, I mean, we've been in a big transition, sort of. I don't even know what you call this over the last year. because it keeps changing, right? So I guess it's not a transition, it's a bunch of uncertainty and a long transition. And now a lot of places are starting to bounce back. Like you were saying, in Hawaii, tourism's open again. Finally, in California, we're starting to open up again. I know some states are going the opposite direction, but regardless of which way it's moving, things are changing again. So, of course, this is very timely for you to write a book about change. But do you do you see or do you think that people have had enough time to really reflect on their lives over the past year, and that they might now be more open to looking at sort of a broader perspective of what they want to do next, or what path they want to pursue?
Everyone's moving at a different pace with their personal growth. And we can hope that there has been a shift towards greater consciousness because of the last year and all the difficulties that we've all experienced. I think some people are going to come out of this with greater self awareness and some really intentional choices about how to live differently. Um, I think some people are still in a lot of fear and are not handling the transition back out into greater life very well. There's still, I'm experiencing a lot of people still in a bit of trauma over the last year and not having their orientation or their grounding yet. So that's interesting, and then I think there are some people who have just are acting here in Hawaii. The tourists seem to be just acting as if there has never been a pandemic and are just operating with a whole lot of not a lot of respect. So I don't know how to
It
answer that.
No, it is interesting. I mean, that's because that's what I'm seeing. There's no consistency. And of course, you can't do this until you're ready to do it, right? But at the same time, I think there are a lot of people that are ready for something, and maybe they don't know what. Like they don't know what the next step is. So maybe they're emerging, like we're just now up to a color level that we can, go back out like to restaurants and things like that after a long time of everything being pretty much closed. But that also means people returning to work for the first time in a year, or returning their kids to school. Our schools just reopened a few weeks ago. So there's this just tons of change happening all at once. And I know I've talked to a few people who just say, I don't know what I want, but I know I don't want to go back to what I had.
And I think this is so important to take this moment, keep the pause long enough to ask the inner questions about what truly matters, what we truly value, what we want to make our emergence based on. So this is critical time for us to be asking these inner questions.
I agree with that. And I also appreciated that you have a chapter in the book on purpose, because I think some people believe that you have one purpose in life. You come here and you've got that one purpose, when in fact, we both know your purpose can change. There may be an overarching sort of theme, maybe, but your purpose changes depending on your phase of life and your situation and all of those things. And so I just wanted to throw that out there for someone who maybe is looking for a starting point. Do you know what your purpose is? Maybe that's where to start. Or do you know, even do you know what you didn't like about the past, and that this is an opportunity before you just change everything to the opposite to spend that time. So I agree with you, to spend the time really exploring what it was about those things that you didn't like, and could it be that it's out of alignment with your values.
I think that's really important. And I think the question, what doesn't matter anymore or what doesn't matter now, is equally as important as the what does matter. So sometimes we learn what we do want by recognizing what we don't want, which is what you're saying. And, in terms of purpose, also, I 100% agree and wrote about that people seem to be looking for this really big sense of purpose. And you mentioned it as a starting point, and I think the starting point is really, what is my purpose in this moment
Mm.
today? How can I show up to this day with a sense of purpose in terms of how I'm interacting, the consciousness with which I'm bringing to this moment, to this conversation? Even, that's our purpose unfolding moment by moment.
Yeah, I agree with that. We spend a lot of time on the difference between intention setting and goals. So it's kind of the same thing, where intentions are daily, you're living your goals, you're experiencing it. And so there's a parallel to that with your purpose, where I think that's great. Focus on something small. And honestly, there's so many people that are still stressed out. I think small is probably more effective for a lot of people right now than trying to change their whole lives, right? So,
Absolutely. And change doesn't happen in great big sweeping motions, usually. I mean, unless it's some catastrophe that just forces us into a big life change. But usually it's done in micro doses and little mini changes throughout our days.
so if you were going to describe who this book is for, how would you describe it?
Hmm. I would just say that it's for someone who has done a bit of self um, awareness work already. You know, maybe they have a mindfulness or a meditation practice of some kind. They might not be as consistent with it as they'd like to be. They've asked, you know, some of the questions internally, but are looking for some deeper answers and a guide to figuring out themselves at a deeper level. You know, the book really came off of my work as a coach for the last 25 years and the process of inquiry that I go through with my clients. So this is, I call it like a year of coaching in your hands, because these are the questions that I work through with my clients often. And these are questions that I go back to personally again and again, because for me, they grow with us. And so it's not a one and done. You know, it's not like, oh, check the answer to question 75, never have to go back to that one. These are things that evolve as we evolve. And so it's worth exploring again and again. So, you know, it's the person who is committed to personal growth.
Yeah, I think that I would agree with that. And I agree with you too. It may not be for someone who's never done any introspective work. I think that would be maybe painful for someone, or they just wouldn't understand it completely. I think you have to have had some exposure to the inner workings to be able to really get the depth of the questions because they're quite deep. Um, which leads me to my next question. If someone starts and they get to a question and they ponder it and ponder it and ponder it and can't come up with an answer, would you suggest they move on to a different question for now and come back to that later, or would you?
Yes, absolutely. I had to laugh. A client of mine said that she opened the book, read one question, thought, oh my gosh, I have no idea. Shut the book, has not opened it again. And you know, we had a good laugh about it. And I've encouraged her to reopen it and look at a different question, because, you know, we don't have to, again, have the answers, all the answers today. That is not what it's about. So yes, absolutely. It's like a yoga posture. If you can't touch your toes today, don't worry about it. Just approach the, forward bend and then move on to the next posture and then approach again the next day. And eventually with time and practice, you'll make improvement. But there's no perfect answers and there's no timeline for this. So it's just a really fun practice to engage with yourself at deeper levels and take the expectations off, have bring some levity to your process. That's one thing that over the years I've learned, that if I can't keep humor in this, it's a sinking ship.
That is the truth. Okay, so my final question to you is, we ask all of our guests this just because we're really trying to reinforce the idea for people that everyone experiences stress, that the stress itself is not necessarily the issue, it's our response or reaction to stress. And we want to give them as many tools as possible so that when they're stressed, they have some go-to. So that's the question. When you have stress rising over whatever, a deadline or something, going haywire, do you have a go-to practice that you use to get recentered or calmer?
Oh, I have no stress, Teresa.
Okay, I've got to go back and reread the book.
um, so keep your own counsel. This is something, going back to accountability. Uh, I find that people get in trouble when they're stressed because they lash out, launch out, react, and they have a bunch of fallout with the people around them because of the stress. We've all done this, myself included. And I've learned over the years that my first strategy to dealing with stress is isolate, be quiet, go into stillness, keep my own counsel, really dig into my toolbox, take some space, so that I don't say something or react or just show up as the grumpy, stressed out person, and create more problems than already exist. So that would be my number one thing.
Perfect. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us today and sharing all of your wisdom. And good luck with the book.
Thank you so much, Teresa. It's so fun that we made the connection around USM, and thank you for having me today.
Thank you.